Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Power Shift 2015 Women in the World Economy Debate at the Oxford Union.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, the motion before the House tonight is that this House believes that feminism needs rebranding. If we had an ecumenical matriarch here to help us with that exercise, I'm sure she would, but we don't. My grandmothers weren't able to go to university, and if they had been able to go to this university, they wouldn't have been able to get a degree. My mother was an undergraduate at Oxford, and she was allowed to listen to debates in the Oxford Union, but not to speak. When I was an undergraduate, I was allowed to speak, but in those days, David Cameron was the president of the Bullingdon Club, Boris Johnson was the president of the Union, and it was quite difficult to get a word in edgeways. Now I'm a barrister, I get to speak quite a lot, but the problem with that is that judges interrupt and ask me awkward questions, and tonight I'm really enjoying the fact that no one is allowed to ask me any questions at all. Brief moment of megalomania. But tonight you'll be pleased to know that I am here as a judge, not an advocate, and my role is merely to moderate the distinguished speakers we have tonight on both sides of the motion. Because with them here, whether or not feminism needs rebranding, and that is of course going to be the subject for you to decide, it certainly won't need rebooting. We're going to have 6 paper speeches as well as your contributions from the floor. The first speaker on either side of the motion will have 8 minutes to speak. Grant will ring the buzzer when they have 1 minute to go. Thus. He's going to ring it again twice when they've come to the end of their slot. And a minute later, he'll sound like a swarm of angry wasps, but I'm sure we won't get there. The second speaker on either side of the motion will have only 6 minutes, which means that the buzzing will start after 5. If, during the course of anyone's speech, a member of the floor, that's one of you, wants to raise a point of information, you can stand and raise your hand, and the speaker can give way if they want to, but they don't have to. After the first 2 speakers on each side of the debate, I will open the motion out to speakers from the floor, and I will take 1 point from any speaker who catches my eye, whom I will pick, as the judicial oath goes, without fear or favour, affection or ill will. But it would be useful if you could tell us who you are and which side of this motion you're speaking for. If I have any reason to interrupt the proceedings, please can everyone except the speakers at the dispatch box resume their seats. After that, there will be a final speaker for each side who will, I am sure, round up in a beautifully crafted peroration lasting precisely 5 minutes. In accordance with the traditions of the House, there will be no booing, hissing, coughing or spitting. Then it's over to you. Those in favour of the motion will proceed through the door marked aye. Those against will proceed through the door marked no, cunningly separated with a brass bar. Then those who have been invited will proceed to Balliol, where the result of the debate will be announced. So without more ado, I call upon Sue Lawton to introduce the motion which stands in her name.
Well, what an honour it is to be here tonight in this place so rich in the history of oratory and to be debating the growth of the women's movement. But you know, this place really is a mirror of what's been happening with women's development and the long and difficult journey we've had. It wasn't until 1963 that women were allowed to be part of the Oxford Union. So the stories that have been told within here are his story. They're not the women's story. The women's story is outside these walls. The women's story is that of courage and bravery that allowed us to start the journey to equality. And what a fierce fight it has been. But, as Laurel Thatcher Ulrich said, well-behaved women seldom make history. It's a tale of many parts, and each part has its own chapter, and each chapter has its own brand. So chapter 1 is before change, when there was chaos and no champions for the women's cause. So let me tell you about Dr. James Barry, Dr. James Barry entered medical school in Edinburgh in 1809, passed his exams for the Royal College of Surgeons in 1813, and became a surgeon in the military and travelled from post to post, going up through the ranks. When his career ended, he was Inspector General in charge of military hospitals in Canada, and he died in London in 1865. And it was only then that they discovered that he was in fact a she. She had been barred from practicing the profession that she was dedicated to. So clearly, things had to change. So bring on Chapter 2, the suffragists, or as the Daily Mail branded them, the suffragettes. Well, what a long process that was as well, when you think from the start of the 20th century until 1928 in the UK to be given equal voting rights with men. Obviously, it was different in other parts of the world, but tonight I am talking about the UK. But after the women had got the vote, it all sort of settled down. They had achieved what they set out to do, and brand suffragettes went quiet. In fact, the whole world of women's movement went a bit underground, but then we did have the Depression, and we had a Second World War to contend with, so it was not until the 1960s that we get to Chapter 3. And of course, Chapter 3 is brand women's liberation. I remember it so well. It was heady days, and if you were not around at that time, or if you were living in other countries, the women's lib movement in the UK came storming into the field. They were radical, they were strident, and for many, perhaps a little too much, too soon. So when Germaine Greer, that great champion of women's lib, said that women should get to know and come to accept their own bodies, taste their own menstrual blood, and give up celibacy and monogamy, well, I think that was time for the women's lib brand to end quietly, because we needed something a bit more acceptable. So welcome Chapter 4 and brand feminism. And what a great job we have done. And I count myself in that group of feminists that have been fighting for equality for women. But so much has been achieved. We have fought so well. We now have the 30% Club, women on boards, he for she, male champions of change. You cannot pick up a paper, a newspaper, in the developed world without having somewhere in there the words equality, women on boards, equal rights. So the fight has been a brilliant one. But I would suggest to you tonight that the fight is now time to become a negotiation. It is time for us to work together, because isn't that what equality is all about? And to do that, we have to work as a team. And Tuckman says that for any team to deliver results, there is an inevitable process they have to go to. So the forming, thank you suffragettes for forming, and the storming, which they did so well. And the women's liberation movement, thank you for all the storming you did, it was definitely stellar. Thank you to the feminist movement, because you did a little bit of storming, but what you've actually given us is the norming, where it is expected and acceptable that women are part, an equal part of what society is doing. So I think for the final part, for performing, we now have to have a new brand, because feminism speaks from the female side. We don't have masculinism. So if we're going to go forward together, shouldn't we have a brand that represents the whole of society, which is what we are striving for as feminists? So I think Chapter 5 is our next step forward, which was equalism. It's the time to look forward. It's the time to be new and inclusive. And it's time for us to have a balanced community and a balanced business. But we have to do this together. So as we go forward on this journey, I would suggest that as you take your step on the journey tonight, you take a step through the I door. And that now is the time for feminism to be rebranded. Madam Chair, I propose to support the motion.
Thank Thank you, Sue, and not a buzzer to be heard. I now call upon Josh Levs to oppose the motion.
See, I'm not tongue-tied, but they start timing me when I start talking, so I just wanted to take a moment to enjoy being up here. Hi. It is an honor, by the way. The fact that we're speaking here says a great deal. Look, that was beautiful. And the truth is, we've spoken behind the scenes. We agree on 99.9% of what this is all about. We all agree that this fight is very important. We all agree in the need for gender equality. But what I need to do is drill down on what the question is tonight, because it's very important, because I recognize, especially as someone who does not live here, that the conversation that happens in here tonight will echo far beyond these walls. And if we send the message tonight that it's time for the brand of feminism to be over, that could truly be devastating to people around the world. And I want you to understand where I'm coming from on this, and I want us all to have a collective understanding of what this conversation is. So we're not here tonight to talk about whether the era of feminism has passed and it's time for a new era. We're given a very specific question, and that question is, does feminism need rebranding? All right, and that's ultimately a yes or a no. So I figured we're at Oxford. It's only fair to go by the Oxford English Dictionary, right? So I looked at the Oxford English Dictionary, and this is, by the way, you'll see how I operate as a journalist. I'm kind of obsessed with doing research. So to rebrand something is to apply a new brand identity. All right, brand identity is in the Oxford English Dictionary. A brand identity is what distinguishes something in order to promote awareness and loyalty. The question we have to ask ourselves is what distinguishes feminism in order to promote awareness and loyalty. And when we ask ourselves that, what we realize is that feminism has a brand. Not only does it have a brand, but feminism's brand is very important. Feminism's brand is gender equality. There are people out there who have different theories about it. There are epochs of history in which that has taken on and led to different movements. The achievements of the suffragettes are absolutely essential, and they've changed the world. So did the women's liberation movement. At the core of it, what you have is a basic brand identity, this belief in gender equality. Now, how do we know that that's really the brand of feminism? Well, for starters, we can look at the dictionary. Oxford English Dictionary specifically says feminism is about brand equality. And then I looked into, someone could argue, well, the definition and the brand are different things. So I actually looked into how do we come up with the definition? How do these trusted sources do this? You know what they do? They look at how a term is used in the language and what that term's identity is. There's this thing called the Oxford English Corpus. They look at thousands and thousands and thousands of texts, including on the web, and they explore them, and they determine what's the identity of that word, and it is factual. Feminism is about gender equality. Now, here's why it's so important that we understand this. Successful brands throughout history have not run away from what they are. Instead, they've done the opposite. And this is true in the corporate world and among social movements. If you have an identity, if you have a brand that matters, what you do is double down. You never run away. I'm a journalist, 10 years on something called NPR in the United States, which is National Public Radio, 10 years on CNN. I'm based in Atlanta, and because I'm based in Atlanta, I have covered the world's best-known brand and the most successful brand in modern history, which is Coca-Cola. What Coca-Cola always did, with one horrible exception, was commit to its brand. For 130 years, Coca-Cola has had one brand identity. That brand identity is giving you moments of refreshment in your day. I mean, look, Coke is carbonated cough syrup. There is no objective reason that you should care that Coca-Cola exists. Why does the entire world know it exists? Because it has a brand identity. It gives you moments of refreshment in your day. Now, that's corporate. Let's move over to the world of social movements, all right? Let's look at what's been happening with LGBT movement in recent years. The LGBT movement faces many of these same challenges. There are people who don't believe in it. There are people who have different views of it. There are people who might be considered extremists. And there are people who will never agree with that because they don't want that equality to happen. Like the great Taylor Swift says, haters gonna hate, 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 hate. That's true of feminism as well. But look what LGBT did, all right? The leaders of this movement made a decision. We will not run away from our brand. Our brand is equality. We won't give it up. Instead, they doubled down. Every poster, every interview, every hashtag, everything you do when you have a brand that works and that matters is you commit to it. The brand of LGBT is equality, and look at what happened. Look at Ireland. Look at the United States. Social scientists and other journalists, including me, will tell you it is the most successful movement in the shortest amount of time that we have ever seen. The achievements of LGBT. And why? Because they committed to the brand of equality. That applies to feminism. Now, let me tell you a little bit about me and my experiences and why this is so important to me and why I am even up here. I am a son of feminists, but the feminist era, rather. I have one mother, but I'm a son of a feminist, and a son of the feminist era. And there are millions and millions and millions of men like me out there, as we just heard. Men are joining this movement in much larger ways than anyone realized. And I, as a journalist, but also as a man, had a reason to discover how desperately we need to push this message further about true gender equality, not just at work, but also in terms of caregiving. My wife and I had drama with each of our children. Our first was born with we had to have major heart surgery after he was born. The second one was born into my arms, not breathing at first because my wife didn't labor. They turned out fine, everything's great. My third child was born several weeks prematurely, and due to backward thinking, I could not get time off to care for my child. So I went off searching for answers. And what I found is that there are millions, tens of millions of men like me around the country and around the world who are facing this. And the reason is that the full understanding of gender equality has not taken root as deeply as it needs to. And this is tearing families apart. And this is very difficult. This is a big challenge that we have ahead of us. So what do we do about it? We make sure that everyone understands that equality has to exist. And it's so beautiful what's happening. She mentioned the he-for-she movement. I was just pinned by the he-for-she movement. I find out at my event with them later this week in New York what exactly that means. But I do know that I'm now representing the he-for-she movement, and I'm proud to. Let's look at what happened with he-for-she. That was announced by Emma Watson. In her speech announcing this, she used the word feminism 7 times. She did not run away from it. And she specifically said, feminism is about gender equality. And look at the results. After she did that, 1.2 billion impressions for he-for-she on social media. And now it's so beautiful. Most people don't even know it's there, but on our website at he-for-she, we have this international map in which men around the world are taking the pledge, stating, I support gender equality. Men in every single country have now taken that pledge. There were 2 tiny ones that didn't have any stamps, so I checked before I came here. Every country. We're talking even the most challenged countries in which we see this desperate battles for equality. Places like India, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, men openly, publicly, with their names, taking this pledge. Because to us, gender equality is just nature. I didn't even need an ism or an ist for it. It's just so obvious. Of course my sister and I could do everything in the same world. We should be able to do that. The way we get there is through gender equality. I want to toss one statistic at you, and then I will give up my time. That's my first sting. I know. One good thing about being a broadcaster all this time is I know the minutes in my head. So because I get cut off by a commercial, so I really don't go on too long. There's this international organization called Images that has done this study, and I want you all to hear this, all right? Men in every country with the exception of India, now support gender equality with 87% to 90%, saying that men do not lose out when women's rights are promoted. We are at the beginning of something incredible. This is a tree. Generations of brave, amazing women and some men planted this tree, and it is reaching the sun. Do not tear it up right now. If you vote yes tonight, then you send the message to everyone that feminism was never really about gender equality. You feed that backward thinking. Please take this seriously. As much fun as we're having tonight, understand that people will see this. And we need to send the message to the entire world that feminism is, and always has been, and will continue to be about gender equality. There's one thing I'm going to end on. Last week, Malala made a decision. She told Emma Watson that she has decided that she is a feminist. She said she was wary of the word. You know why she chose to be feminist? Because thanks to Emma Watson, she now understands that feminism is about gender equality. She has joined that. We should all join that. Let's not turn our back on feminism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. I now call on Lynne Featherstone to propose the motion, or to speak in support of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening. I got sacked from my first job. It was a small design company. I beat 200 other applicants to get the job. One of the directors invited me to join him and some very important clients watching a show reel and having drinks, and he then said he would give me a lift home. You know where this is going. On the way, he insisted on stopping for another drink, and then when he dropped me at my mother's house, he made a very crude lunge at me. I told him to F off, and I was sacked the next day. I sobbed, grief-stricken, to my mother, who told me it was just one of life's little lessons. That was a very, very long time ago, and thank goodness it is no longer one of life's little lessons. It is sexual harassment, bullying, discrimination, and it is against the law. I have always been a feminist, in fact an uber feminist. I have always campaigned for women's equality, and I sadly will probably never be able to stop. But I have reached a point where I think there's a better way than separatism. I was Equalities Minister for 2.5 years at the beginning of the coalition. I was also the ministerial champion for tackling violence against women and girls overseas. I'm the originator and architect of same-sex marriage, of the government action to end female genital mutilation within a generation. I produced the first transgender action plan in the whole world. I made disability in the developing world mainstream through the Department of International Development. And I tell you this not for boasting reasons, but to prove that I am an equal rights campaigner. And what I've learned over all of this time is that we are much, much stronger together. And I've gone from being a feminist to being an equalist. And I remember in the 2010 general election, there was a hustings at Stonewall. Stonewall, for our American friends, although it actually came from America, is our leading LGBT organization. There were two guys in the front of the audience, and they were cracking jokes about the trans community in front of me. I gave them what for. I then, when we started the hustings, I abandoned my speech completely. I had a real go at the audience. It was a gay audience, and I gave them what for, because it was not a rare occurrence to find that the gay community was being horrible to the trans community. Obviously, that's changed quite substantially since, and now Stonewall, which was LGB as an organization, is now LGBT. In the last couple of weeks, we have seen feminists giving the trans community a hard time. They've been incredibly awful and horrible and cruel to them. And my argument is that divided we fall. And if we think that we have inequality here, and we do have inequality here with 2 women a week killed by their partner or ex-partner, then as you go across the world, as I've done in my roles, it just gets worse. You have rape as a weapon of war, acid attacks, female feticide, breast ironing, no right to own property. In fact, women are property. And what I've discovered in all of my work is that women's rights and gay rights are intrinsically bound together, as are all rights, in fact. And there is this really huge challenge in the world with men's power. Political power, decision-making power, financial power. And there's a real challenge with our patriarchal history and heritage. And of course, we need to be as strident and as forceful as ever, but on all fronts. And whilst I did notice that you kept saying don't run away from feminism, but kept referring to gender equality. It was quite a striking observation. I often want to fight some of the hideous trolls, sexists, and what I would call poor me men who spend an inordinate amount of time harassing me online, or any woman for that matter who puts her head above the parapet. Sites like Laura Bates' Everyday Sexism really exemplify the casual sexism that we face day in, day out, and any one of us who raises our voice is abused. Whenever I go into print or social media on ending FGM, for example, there's no greater example, in my view, of patriarchal control of women than cutting off young girls' sexual bits. I get a slew of men who come and say, what about me? What about male circumcision? I explain to these poor unfortunates that FGM is not really the same as male circumcision, that it is the equivalent of cutting off their penises, and that it's a practice that wouldn't have lasted 4 minutes, let alone 4,000 years, if it had been happening to men. And it makes me angry, and there is a huge temptation, one that I have fallen prey to many times, to become virtually anti-men. But, of course, there's no excusing the idiot men who act that way. But that's not the answer, because what we're looking for is how do we best deliver change? We really have to change the game. We need an inclusive society. We need to leave no one behind. It doesn't matter that I should not be able to champion women's equality or disability rights or trans rights or gay rights, but it does mean that the sum of us is much better together than separately. And the answer, I think, has to be all of us fighting for all of us. We have one world, and we need to share it equally. So I would say, roll on equalism, and thank you, Madam Chair. I beg to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynne. And now I call on Susan Rudy to oppose the motion.
I have one task here tonight, and that will be a simple one. I plan to convince you unequivocally that feminism certainly does not need to be rebranded. I don't think this will be difficult to do. Why? For one very simple reason. Feminism offers the only theory the world has ever seen of women's humanity. Rebranding feminism would mean losing a connection to this long, rich, and successful history. It would align us with those who lack the courage to say, I am a feminist, or to follow through on the insights of feminism. Feminism is certainly about equality in a world which still desperately requires it. 223 years after Mary Wollstonecraft published A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, British women still earn about 19% less than men. The domestic and caring work that women are still expected to do remains unpaid and undervalued. These statistics are obviously worrying, unfair, and limit human potential. But other statistics are, frankly, just infuriating, like the fact that 85,000 women are raped every single year. Beyond the UK, as many as 80% of human trafficking victims are women or girls. Yes, feminism is about equality, and equality will redress these injustices. Feminism will facilitate basic human rights. Certainly, the general public needs to be much better informed about what feminism is. But if we have had a problem in getting our message heard, that itself is because of sexism. Women control neither public space nor the dissemination of knowledge. Even for elite women, the world has not changed nearly enough. As Laura Bates reminded us in The Guardian just last week, there are more men named John who run FTSE 100 companies than there are women. But those of us in the room tonight know all of this. I don't think I've said a single statistic that you haven't heard 23 times. We in this room do know all of this. We know that feminism is the only social movement that has ever cared about changing the world in the interests of women. Who has time to talk about rebranding? From the 15th century until the early 20th, to brand meant to burn with a hot iron. In doing so, one was marked indelibly. And feminism does mark one indelibly, as the generations of feminists who have been permanently transformed by its insights can testify. It continues to take courage to call oneself a feminist. But this means it has a powerful brand, one that sends a challenging and dangerous message to those who would oppose us. In a 2015 paper on gender equality and human rights produced for the United Nations, Oxford professor Sandra Fredman and her colleagues remind us that at this point in history, we must argue for more than just the requirement that likes be treated alike. In the face of considerable antecedent disadvantage, seemingly equal treatment can actually re-entrench disadvantage. Instead, what we need is substantive equality. To gain substantive equality, we will need to do 4 things. We will need to redress disadvantage rather than insist simply on like treatment. We will need to address stigma, prejudice, humiliation, and violence. We will need to transform social and institutional structures. And finally, we will need to facilitate political participation and social inclusion. Feminism does offer the only theory the world has ever seen of women's humanity, but in so doing, it could free us all, not only from sexism and homophobia and transphobia, but also from racism. And if I had one more minute, I could say more about that. Feminism teaches us that our ideas about what it means to be individuals with a particular sex or gender identity or race have been so intermingled with flesh for so long that they have come to appear natural. But appearance is the operative word. As the mid-20th century feminist philosopher Simone de Beauvoir reminds us, no biological, psychical, or economic destiny defines the figure that the human female takes on in society. Rather, we are, each of us, creations of ideas and gestures, assumptions and habits, biases, prejudices. The implications of this feminist insight alone are vast and play a crucial role in people's lives when we come to understand that our expectation of ourselves and of others, and the limitations we put on ourselves and others, are shaped by something that is not intrinsic and certainly not inevitable. Yet the fluidity of gender and sex remind us of another very simple fact. In the words of Oxford scholar and detective fiction writer Dorothy Sayers, women are more like men than like anything else in the world. Men are also more like women than anything else. We are all human beings. I put it to you, therefore, and finally, that rebranding feminism would be a distraction that we can ill afford. Disadvantage, stigma, prejudice, humiliation, and violence must be redressed so that substantive equality can be attained. This feminist work will require enormous commitments of time and energy. We will need to stand up for and be counted as feminists. Feminism must be embraced, not rebranded.
I'm now opening the debate to the floor, so anyone who wants to contribute. Yes.
Michelle Goodwin, University of California, Irvine, Chancellor's Professor of Law. What's disturbing about the way in which the debate has been framed and both sides of the discussion is what it leaves out. And that is to say, not until the last talk was racism mentioned, and then it was as an afterthought if there was more time and you had a minute left over. The concern there is that, of course, women can, in fact, become just like men. And history has shown itself to be that feminism has at times left out its sisters of color. From the time of slavery and the plantation to the suffrage movement, when women of color were told to stay at the back of the line or don't be in the line at all. In the United States, this meant that not until the civil rights movement was true equality with voting actually achieved, because suffragettes were just as willing to vote on their own and leave their black sisters behind in the United States. So when we talk about to brand or not to brand, what has been left out on both sides of the discussion has been something that's a deeper type of equality than what has been presented here tonight, and that's disappointing.
Chairman, I'm Iva Kaufman, and from New York. I'm a member of the board of the People's Movement for Human Rights Learning, and I'd like to submit that what's absent from this discussion is a human rights framework. Within a human rights framework, we have gender equality. I'd also like to point out, as a former member of the Feminist Press Board, that feminism is the only non-gendered word. in the dictionary that defines this position of gender equality. So thank you.
I've been asked to remind you, please can you say whether you're for or against the motion? They might not have decided. You might be undecided. You're allowed to be undecided.
My name is Lori. I work with Oxfam. And I don't think you need to choose between those brands. I started as an anti-racist activist. I joined the anti-racism activists because I was disappointed in my feminist sisters. But I was always a feminist, and I am a feminist. And so I think I can be a feminist and an equalist without any problem.
I think there might be a fire exit if you don't know which way to go. I don't want you to get hurt on the path. Anyone else?
Hello. I am for this side that says let's not give up on feminism. And I have sort of a story related to racism, which was kind of a tired term, to be honest with you, all the time I was growing up in California. What's racism? What's racism? So last week, my twins are 16-year-olds and they go to Berkeley High School. And there was a kid that left a very racist message on the high school, the library computer. And so 2/3 of the students on Thursday morning got up, that's about 3,000 kids got up, marched through Berkeley, went all the way to the Campanile, to the campus, to protest. A lot of people said, well, why did these kids do this? Why would they leave the school? Because the kids that were not African American completely supported the fact that racism was not tolerated in their community. These are 16-year-olds. When I was 16, would I have done that? Would the kids here in Oxford Secondary School have done that? No. The point here is that racism was a tired, it truly was a tired term. People didn't know what it meant. They thought it meant people of color. All of these kids and teachers at Berkeley High got up and did this march. And the kids, they completely accepted that they cannot stand for something that isn't equal in their own community. So I just say, reflect on that for a moment and think about the arguments against feminism, which is that we're tired of hearing it, it doesn't mean anything anymore. It does, but you've got to get, as the gentleman speaker said, you've got to get the right critical mass of people to imagine what it would be like without this term. So, that's all. Thank you.
Elaine Stalky, I'm from Cambridge, and I've been the president of an NGO for a long time. I really want to say that feminism is always evolving, so we don't need to rebrand it. And right now, feminism is really bothered about international and global violence against women, as I am as a member of the NGO. And feminism is deeply worried about all of the issues that you've mentioned tonight. And therefore, it's a powerful movement, and it still moves on all the time. Now feminism has actually branched into whole areas of faith movements. So whether it's Christianity, or whether it's Islam, or Hinduism, or Buddhism, you find feminists there because they understand that they have to stand together in this global movement to move onwards. And I think the final word ought to be to Lucy Irigaray, who says, the problem with talking about equality, the question is always equal to whom? And the answer is always equal to men. So men or whites or whatever stay the norm. And I think equality as a concept is a damaged one. And don't let's go down that road to rebrand.
Hello, my name is Tuba Charakli. I come from a country where we assume women's rights are not existing. And I do second the feminism must stay, because we have too many heroes in our history that we're going to forget about if the phrase disappears. The brand identity, however, needs to be re-injected, that it is about equality. We're not built equal. I like my off days paid when I have 4 kids, but I would have preferred if my husband was allowed to join them with me. And thus, I'm for feminism. Aye.
From the Saïd Foundation. Recently I happened to find myself studying gender in Iraq, and was quite startled to find that under Saddam Hussein there had actually been this period which academics of gender referred to as sort of state feminism, where women had rights and support beyond what we have here, for example, to childcare and so on. Of course, he had his reasons for doing that, his political reasons for doing that. But then, with sanctions and the invasion of Iraq and the militarization of Iraqi society before that, all those gains that women had were lost. And when I looked at this and the sheer daily grind and violence that women had to face, of course I felt very angry at the role that we in the West had played in creating that situation, in aggravating that situation. But I also understood in a way I didn't, as someone who lives in Britain and has all the advantages of a British woman, that you can lose it. It can go backwards, and we owe a lot to the fact that we have had peace for a very long time. But we have to understand that not only is it not over, not only have we not got equality yet, but actually it can go backwards. And so you just can't stop using the word feminism. It doesn't mean that you don't have all the other fights as well, but you can't stop using the word feminism when that's the situation.
So I definitely am one of those people who takes great pride in having absolutely no fear of identifying as a feminist to anyone. But I do think that there's something that should be recognized, particularly in this company, and that is that feminism of the last 40 years has been extremely unfriendly to markets. Extremely unfriendly to corporations, extremely unfriendly to all the structures that we're trying to work with at PowerShift these 2 days. And that I think it is important to recognize that sometimes rebranding is just about the change of a name or the change of a logo, adaptation of a sign. But sometimes it's about being more expansive, and sometimes it's about being up to date, and sometimes it's about being fresh and new. And so I think that it's really, it's important to recognize that where feminism may not need to be rebranded, it probably needs a pretty good line extension, all right, in order to accommodate all of the work that is being done by this group.
Hello, I'm Joanna Foster, and a moon or two ago I chaired the Equal Opportunities Commission in Britain. And sitting here tonight takes me back to a debate in this room where the motion was that feminism was irrelevant for the 1990s. I was opposing that, and I have to say that I'm well lined up with feminism being hugely important still, but I agree with Linda, a bit of line adaptation. The thing that won us that motion, and there were some mighty speakers on the other side, was that many young men in the room got up and said, we really hope that we are going to get to know our children better than we've known our fathers, i.e. where is the family-friendly employment? How can we deal with the pressures, the non-work-life balance, all of the issues that we see re-emerging now with the pressures of big corporate life, and why so many people like to run their own lives and their own enterprises despite the pressures of doing that. So I think keeping the line on feminism but enlarging it, and I agree enormously, in the days when I chaired the Equal Opportunities Commission, we did not deal with other gender issues, we did not deal with racism. And so that's really important, and although I was rather opposed to the Equal Opportunities Commission going in with the Human Rights Commission because it got rather watered down, those issues need to be in the debate as well. And I shall go out with this side.
Good evening, my name is Deborah Owen, and I'm currently a student here at Oxford at the business school and doing an MBA. And so, as I sit down and I think about it, I'm a woman of Nigerian descent, and I think about what my mother's generation think of when they think of the term feminism, and they don't identify with it. So when I think about feminism, I want a word that's going to include not just the Western society, but the East, the global South, North, everywhere in the world. And so what I would like for us to think about is how this word feminism actually includes the entire world, not just people in the West, people who are representing and dealing with issues all over the world. And so I would really like that motion to be thought about. And so I'm still thinking on which side I am, because I think rebranding is good, but I also think that it can be a distraction. But I want it to be inclusive so that my mother and my grandmother, who also fought for women's rights in Nigeria, can also feel included when they think about that word feminism. Thank you.
My name's Mara Brankin, and I'm a feminist. I've always been a feminist, or at least I became a feminist when I became a mother. And I realized that the discrimination that I encountered then in terms of trying to get control over my own body and my own birthing, and the assumptions that were being made about me in terms of what I could and couldn't do because I was becoming a mother, made me realize that I needed to be a feminist. I needed to be a feminist for my daughter, for my sons, and for my granddaughter. There have been many, many waves along the way. And I said, we never got it all right. 40 years ago, we were campaigning for creches, we were campaigning for finding ways to express our own thoughts, feelings, and rights. And some of those rights, we had no idea what they were. I was one of those people who would have been against what we're talking about today and tomorrow. I saw feminism as a different kind of creature. I now realize that feminism comes in many, many, many ways, and we should all fight from the place that we're at and be cognizant that none of us has the only feminist way. I'm a feminist. Branding is for products, for things that are transient. The fight for humanity goes on.
Yes. But you have to go to the microphone so I can bash the bell if you go on for too long.
Grant Phillips, ladies loosen up. My wife, who is sitting up there, would be the first person to tell me if I was out of order in any conversation that I would have, which was not viewed through her correctly value-driven prism, which on this order paper is called feminism. As I said this last year, forgive me, I got a new one this year. I was going to say I'm a member of your sisterhood. I think this year I'm now, what did Marcus call it this morning? Crossover. I'm a crossover now. Anyway, whatever I am. To me, this order paper, this house believes that feminism needs rebranding. Rebranding in that sense means to me a conscious step back, evaluate, and do what Charlotte and her team have done over the years at Coca-Cola. And so, right guys, this is the new way forward. I don't view it that way. I, as a man in your world, think it's about an evolution. I think it's about my wife and children, especially the daughters, pulling me up short when I get out of order. That, to me, is the way that we need to move feminism. That's the evolution which is feminism. And therefore, I instinctively think I identify very much with what Sue was saying when she proposed the motion. I haven't got my bell, but I better shut up. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Noam Angrist. I'm a graduate student here at Oxford. I would encourage everyone to look around and see how many men are here. And I was going to actually ask that all the men stand, but I won't force you to stand. It's very few. And so my question, I propose a question, which is, do we want, I've heard really wonderful things tonight. Do we want everyone to hear those things? And if we do, how do we achieve that? What was the title of this talk, and who showed up? And how do we get everyone to get at the table to hear the important things that were said tonight? I'm undecided, but I do think that's important to note. Thank you.
Yeah? So, I'm not sure whether, I'm still not sure whether I'm in favor, but I think I'm actually going towards not changing the title. And I think because if you think about the terms developing world versus developed world, or the title NGO, there's a somewhat sort of a connotation of something that you have to move towards something to become better. And I also work on women's economic empowerment in the projects that I work on, and I find that over the years that yes, we talk about gender equality and inequality, but it always suggests a linear forward motion, that you have to reach some type of goal. And then I ask myself, well, what will happen when you reach that goal? What will happen when women are in the same amount as men, or women have equal voting rights all over the world, or equal land rights? There'll still be a struggle, and it feels like the filling of a positive space with the title feminism actually holds its own value, that there are things that are distinct within feminist movements, within women's communities, just as much as maybe there might be things that are distinct within men's communities, as well as blended or whatever those things are. But it feels like having a space which is a positive thing, which is a meaningful thing, even if you disagree with it, that maybe holding that title, which is a space that would be only for women, has a value in and of itself, rather than something that suggests we always have to be working towards something to reach a goal. Because I don't know if that goal will truly be reached, but having a space to work in and feel whole while we're working towards that can be very valuable for very many people, both men and women.
Good evening, Andre Evolution, MBA candidate. I am a copywriter by trade, so you'll forgive me that my mind immediately drifts to the precise selection of the words that this debate is structured around which this debate is structured. Does feminism need rebranding? We've discussed feminism, we've discussed rebranding. We seem to gloss over the use of that word need. I think there is a fascinating debate to be had about whether or not feminism would be more effective at reaching across borders and in the 21st century if it were to be rebranded. I don't think that's the one we're having tonight. I think to suggest that feminism needs rebranding is to suggest that it is failing, that it is on the verge of drowning, on the verge of dying. And while I certainly second the notion that it would be preferable if there were more males here currently, if there were more non-Anglo-Saxon members of the community, the fact that there are more than zero currently of both of those and other demographics is a suggestion that I believe it's hard to say that the movement is dying or on its last legs. Could it be exacerbated? Could it move quicker if rebranded? Perhaps. That is importantly, in my mind, not the debate we're having here. Does it need rebranding? I think need is an excessively strong word.
Good evening. Laurie Spengler from a company called Include, focused on building inclusive local economies. And I was debating in my own mind which way to go. And the last speaker, actually, you've catalyzed me in my thinking. But exactly contradictory to what you said in the following way. To me, the need, it wasn't about dying. It was about achieving what both sides have been articulating, which is the equality. That's the aspirational trajectory we're on. And there was alignment on both sides of the House. So how do we achieve that? And I think language matters. I think it really matters. Some of the comments about bridging, language that bridges others, and language that encourages those who are not in the room tonight to come into the room. So I think we should reflect without changing, altering, diluting the power of our conceptual underpinning, the language that brings others along with us and propels us forward.
Well, after those fine linguistic points, I'm now going to call on Mike Thornton to sum up in support of the motion.
Thank you very much, and also I must thank the union for allowing us to come here and speak today in this august and historical place. I think one of the things I like perhaps is that I feel a little bit like Mark Antony at saying, I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him, and then praising him. And I think it's a bit worrying. Now, Josh talked about how effective the LGBT brand was. And it is because it's new, because it's exciting, because it's a new brand that has transformed the old brand. And so it's extraordinarily effective. And it's not effective because the old brand was dying. It's effective because the new brand is an extension and an addition to the old brand, which makes it even more powerful. So he was right. He was wrong about Coca-Cola. They rebrand constantly. You've even got green Coca-Cola cans. Now, if that's not a rebrand, I don't know what is. Susan, you talked effectively about disabled. And I am passionate about mental health. I'm passionate about transgender. I'm passionate about racism. And I'm sorry it wasn't brought up. You were so right. It should be at the forefront. My mother's grandmother did the first mixed-race school in Tennessee that I know of in 1940, and she had stones through her window. My mother grew up in a situation that was a country that was worse to be black than it was in South Africa in the 50s and 60s. And by God, we still have to keep going. There are still problems everywhere with racism. We have to work together. We have to fight together, not separately. It doesn't mean that feminism goes. No one on this side is ever suggesting you're not going to be a feminist anymore because you're going to work with everybody to put the case for equality with, not equality to, not equality of, but equality with everybody else, male, female, transgender, black, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, young, old, people with Alzheimer's, people who have problems in other ways. No, it's to be together. We must fight together. Now, all I can say about the feminist movement, it has been the most effective movement for equality this world has ever seen. So why can't we extend that, bring it out, so we can work it elsewhere? We can see it used, what you've done, what the feminist movement has done, to bring in everybody together, to fight together, to give everybody the chance that women have been fighting for. And yes, there's so much more to do in the women's movement. So much more in this country, the United States, in France, even in Norway and Sweden and Denmark, where we all think, oh, they're the epitome of the women's movement. And we saw today in some of the slides that that's just not true. So there's so much to do. But there's so much more to do in other parts of the world. We can't. No one movement can do this on its own. No one movement can achieve the equality, can achieve the fairness and the decency and anti-discrimination that we need. No one movement on its own, no one sex, no one race, no one group of people can do this. We've got to do it together. And that's why I want to fight and fight and fight again, so that we can work together. And that's why we need to say to people out there, to the men out there, to the others out there, that it's not just about feminine, it's about everyone. And that's why, yes, everybody here knows that feminism is not about excluding men. But if everybody knew that, where are the other men? And I'm sorry, but this is the problem. Josh and I know what feminism is. Josh and I know that feminism is fighting for everybody's rights and freedoms. But unfortunately, the rest of the world doesn't. So we've got to bring them in. We've got to fight to get them into us. And I just want to finish off just by saying something right here. John Donne said many years ago, and I know he started with "No man is an island," and I apologise for that, but he finished off with saying, "Never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." A black person suffering is a feminist cause. A transgender person being attacked is a feminist cause. But people don't realise that. So let us go forward together. I'm not asking this House to roll back or reduce their commitment to fight for women's empowerment, to fight for the feminist ideal. I'm asking this House to lead the fight for equality for all of us. This time has come now for the movement to go forward. And I look to you, to your experience, for your willingness to fight and sacrifice, and for your looking at your record to achieve those ideals for everybody. Doesn't mean we get rid of the word feminism. It does mean we expand it and concentrate it, and that's what rebranding is, and that's what we have to do, all of us together, and that's why rebranding is so important. Thank you very much. Madam Chairman, I support this motion wholeheartedly.
Finally, I call on Amanda Poole to sum up in opposing the motion.
Ladies and gentlemen, or can I just say feminists, I wonder what the collective noun is for a gathering of feminists. I came up with a femposium, but perhaps that's a topic for dinner later. But wait, there goes my marketing side, getting all hung up on words when it's actions that matter. Let's look at what is being proposed here by our opposing team. That feminism, as we know it, is now out of date and out of favour with newer generations, so it needs a refresh, a new look to be relevant to this phase. Let's be clear, we're not debating the values of feminism or arguing with the proposition speakers over the importance of feminism. We're all agreed on those values. Rather, we are debating whether feminism needs rebranding. As a marketeer, I need to ask you, rhetorically of course at this stage, when do you rebrand? And the answer is you rebrand when your values are no longer relevant and need restating or repositioning. And, as so coherently argued by my two esteemed colleagues here, the values and goals of feminism are as relevant today as they have ever been. Why then divert our precious energy to a rebrand when we should be using it to reach out further into all our communities and to redouble our efforts to ensure better equality in our societies? More humanity, as Susan and Josh have so ably demonstrated, is what is needed, not more marketing. One further point I would raise: rebranding as we know it is the domain of the commercial world, and so I would ask, who is it we are suggesting is doing this rebrand? Commercial organisations and advertising agencies? It is arrogant of us to suggest we could speak for the world in a rebrand of feminism, in deciding what flag to rally behind and what wording needs to be used. This is something that grows organically and is best flexed locally to resonate most strongly with people working all over the world to change their situation. I argue that our energy needs to be focused on communicating and achieving the existing goals and values of feminism, rather than distracting ourselves with rebranding, which will no doubt alienate as many people as we attract. We need to be rebuilding our numbers, courage, and influence, not our brand. A recent example of a campaign where the energy went into short-term attention and did not communicate the fundamentals is, for me, New Labour in the UK. The effort, the money, the razzmatazz that went into New Labour and the Blair campaign, successful, very at the time, but relatively short-lived when you see the enthusiasm of all ages to regroup around Jeremy Corbyn. Is he a clever marketer, or is he simply someone authentically stating the original and deeply held Labour Party values? So finally, in the words of the Spice Girls and their girl power anthem, I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. I want us all to continue our work towards equality and access for all, and to ignore the distractions of generating more logos, symbols, buzzwords, and catchy tunes. Feminists, please vote no. This House does not agree that feminism needs rebranding. Oh, and by the way, I think the collective noun for a group of feminists should be a force of feminists. Now that sounds good. Madam Chair, I therefore oppose the motion.
Well, after those extremely interesting and lively speeches on both sides, it's now make your mind up time. You may feel, having heard a number of contributions from the floor, that you have some sense of which way the wind is blowing. Anyone who watched opinion polls coming in May this year in this country will know it's not over till it's over. It's not over till the votes are cast. So be careful which way you go. When you go through the door. If you believe that feminism does need rebranding, then you're an aye, and you go through the yes door. If you believe it does not need rebranding, you're a no, and you go through the no door. If you're still not sure, stay behind and we'll sneak you out some other way. But for those of you who have been invited to the reception this evening at Balliol, that is where you will learn what has happened, because the Dean of the Business School will tell us. If you are a blow-in, I'm really sorry we haven't got enough food, so you will have to find out some other way. But thank you very much for coming tonight.